this House believes that retributive justice is obsolete, and with that I look to Sara Dube, St Hugh's College Standing Committee, to open the case for the proposition.
An eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. The Code of Hammurabi, 1754 BC. Retribution, a system of justice where the punishment for a crime is proportionate to the crime itself, has been used for thousands of years and continues to be a founding principle in many criminal systems. But it has become obsolete in our modern world. To convince you to vote with the proposition tonight, I will show you three things. First, what the purpose of a justice system is. Second, how retribution no longer fulfills this purpose. And third, how alternative justice systems are more effective in today's world. So to begin, what's the purpose of a justice system? The first aim is building a safer society to ensure that similar crimes are no longer committed. And the second is victim satisfaction. The use of retribution to fulfill these aims began on an individual level. From the Vikings in Iceland to clans in Albania, blood vengeance and revenge killings were common. You stole my kill, I'll steal yours. You killed my friend, I'll kill yours. But these individual vicious circles of revenge became unsustainable, and leaders were forced to institutionalize retribution. Decisions on crime and punishment were placed in the hands of larger societal organs. And as we moved from more tribal to urban and interconnected civilizations, and as society became more globalized and developed, there's been an explosion in the importance given to human rights. This abstract idea has started to be used as a justification for retribution, in saying that punishing criminals protects these values. But let us not forget that the creation of this seemingly morally superior motive masks the initial root of retribution, a human desire for revenge. And let us not mistake this desire for revenge with a desire for justice. This illusion can no longer continue. But before I go further, it falls upon me to introduce the opposition for tonight's debate. Speaking first is ex-member Standing Committee and the current Women's Officer at the Union, Minal Haq, a third-year law student at Christ Church and a fellow member of the Union's Access Committee. While I've only had the pleasure of meeting Minal this year, she's been involved in the Union since her very first term at Oxford and is a dedicated committee member. In fact, her commitment to bringing speakers to the Union has gone as far as inviting DJ Khaled via Snapchat. Speaking second on the opposition is Peter Dawson, Director of the Prison Reform Trust. Mr. Dawson has worked in the prison department in the Home Office, served on the prisons board, and has acted as a prison governor. And closing the case for the opposition tonight is Diane Curry, CEO of Partners of Prisoners, an organization that supports the relationship between prisoners and their families. I look forward to hearing the views of the esteemed opposition in tonight's debate. Mr. President, these are your guests, and they're most welcome. In the modern world, globalization has caused many countries to sign international human rights treaties, and most have also abolished the death penalty. These steps, away from pure retribution, already render the literal interpretation of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth obsolete. Punishments such as mutilation and shaming are regarded as uncivilized and inapplicable to the modern justice system. Many modern systems instead employ punitive measures such as life imprisonment or imprisonment in squalid and unsafe conditions. And such systems do not work in comparison with their alternatives. For instance, let's look at the prison system of Norway. Norwegian prisons prioritize rehabilitation. They do not have bars on the windows. They encourage friendships between inmates and guards. And they provide vocational training to offenders. One inmate serving 11 years for murder says that an addiction to drugs drove his crime. While serving his sentence, he has recovered from this addiction and hopes to integrate back into society. He says, "When I get out, I want to live and have a family. And here I'm learning to be able to do that." The primary aim of such a system is not to punish, but to integrate, not to propagate a cycle of violence, but to incorporate the offender back into society. And it clearly works. Norway has one of the lowest recidivism rates in the world. To those who characterize criminals as people who won't learn or can't change, this doesn't mean that we should just give up on them and their potential to change. This is reflected in the Norwegian policy of a maximum sentence of 21 years, which can only be increased if the criminal is deemed not to have achieved full rehabilitation. And to those who say that this argument is circular, as it may be already peaceful societies that choose less punitive systems, I point to the example of a prison in the UK, not quite the most peaceful society in the world. Prison Grendon takes a therapeutic communities as opposed to a retributive approach, where teams of doctors and counselors work with offenders to promote rehabilitation, and they have reduced recidivism. Such an approach addresses crime at its very root by recognizing any mental or behavioral disorders that criminals may have. With the rise of behavioral sciences in the past century and increased medical care, the retributive punishment of those who commit crime due to such disorders is a tool of the past. So restorative programs are clearly more effective in fulfilling, one, the aim of building a safer society, and two, the goal of victim satisfaction. But now the opposition could also attack the scope of the aims of justice that I presented. They may say that some crimes are just so heinous that the scope and the aim of justice should extend to include punishing the offender for what they have done. Punishment for the sake of punishment. I turn to one of the most famous cases of rehabilitative justice to respond. During the Rwandan genocide, the Hutu majority killed about 70% of the Tutsi minority population, a crime for which no excuses can be made. A retributive response to this mass slaughter would have begun a cycle of revenge, which, far from bringing the two groups together, would have caused further division. Instead, through local rehabilitative projects facilitating dialogue between Tutsis and Hutus, victims and perpetrators, the two groups have since moved towards reconciliation. Instead of focusing on punishment, they focused on repairing the damage caused. Instead of holding on to the past, they built a better future. This clearly shows that retribution no longer works and is no longer applicable in our modern age. Over the entire course of history, as human societies and relationships have evolved from tribal to rural to urban, our government structures and processes have evolved along with them. Yet the logic of justice seems to remain stuck in retribution. It's clearly become obsolete, so why do we still insist on its relevance? Is it the human instinct for revenge? The idea of moral desert? The appeal of rebalancing some moral scales of the universe? This surely can't come from the part of the victim, as restorative programs empirically exhibit greater rates of victim satisfaction than retributive ones. No, this desire for revenge comes from the individual satisfaction that third parties such as bystanders and jurors get when it is meted out. This has become an ingrained human instinct. When we see someone doing something wrong, we want to see them punished, even if we ourselves are not affected by the crime. And this entirely misses the point of a criminal justice system. It does not exist to appease your and my sense of morality, but to eliminate reoffending and the budding of crime in the first place. The illusory conception that retribution is a moral necessity is fundamentally flawed and devalues the principal aims of justice. It stands in the way of recognizing the true nature of retribution, that it is obsolete. Our sense of fairness has been intertwined with the idea of retribution for so long that it is difficult now to separate the two. But the sooner we do, the sooner we can move past its out-of-date practices. I leave you tonight with the story of Justin Dickens, convicted of capital murder in the US. Justin grew up with a mother addicted to drugs and he too developed a drug addiction. After stealing from a drug dealer, he shot a worker in a store in an attempt to steal jewelry to pay the dealer back. And while the daughter of the victim has since forgiven him, Justin was placed on death row and later sentenced to life imprisonment. Compare this to the murderer that I mentioned earlier from Norway. He too was addicted to drugs, but through a rehabilitative prison program has since recovered and hopes to integrate back into society. Programs such as those in Norway and the therapeutic communities in the UK show that prisons can still exist without being purely retributive. These are programs that promote a more cohesive as opposed to divisive society, that promote future security while also ensuring victim satisfaction, that are not purely about punishment, but also about molding the offender into someone who can contribute to society. In contrast, retributive justice is not only obsolete, but quite frankly, a failure. The restorative ideal appeals to the pragmatism of our scientific age in rejecting the importance of irrational emotions such as revenge. Restorative justice focuses on repairing the harm caused by crime, while retribution punishes an offense and causes further harm in the process. Restorative justice is characterized by open dialogue, while retribution is characterized by negative emotions between victims and perpetrators. Restorative justice, by definition, restores offenders to a place in society as citizens, while retribution further alienates them. With the primacy of human rights in today's world, which do you pick? With advances in science, medicine, and pragmatism, which do you think seems more obsolete? With the advent of globalization and international treaties, which do you favor? Backward-looking retribution or forward-looking restoration? These are not just systems of justice. They represent the values of our time. And I urge you to vote with the values of today and with the proposition tonight. Thank you.